We want to kick things off with the rugby, and I believe Alan Quinlan, you're standing by. Morning, Quinny.
Morning, lads. How are you?
Good, thanks. With some leaks doing the rounds, I'm sure you've been looking at the back pages already this morning to see what the team makeup is going to be. Will we jump in with the back row, Quinny, and see what your take is here? Do you know, I was looking at the stats for Ruddock because he's a name that comes up fairly regularly about that he hasn't had enough caps. Ruddock, 26 caps, 12 starts, 14 as a sub. Alan Quinlan, 27 caps, 11 starts, and 16 as a sub. Your careers are, there's a parallel here.
Yeah, there is a little bit. He hasn't played since that game in the quarterfinals. He came off the bench in Japan. So, yeah, he isn't kicked on really. I think he's had injuries, but I'm a fan of Ruddock. I think he's a really good player. He's a very aggressive player, great ball carrier, and someone who I have no issue having in the team. I think he's well capable of doing a really good job for Ireland on Sunday, and he's the right person to go in there at the moment. I think his form has been good with Leinster, and someone who will definitely not be daunted by the task. In fact, he'll be out to prove a point, I think, and he's a very physical player against a side who are going to be, they're a big, strong, physical side, France, and I'm sure he'll do well, Ruddock, on Sunday, and won't let the side down in any way.
Yeah, he hasn't featured since the Rugby World Cup, so you'd have to assume from all of that Andy Farrell wasn't necessarily beating a path to him. Maybe not have been the biggest fan. Does he suffer a bit, Quinny? And I'll venture to say, in the most complimentary sense, that you might have done this, suffered a bit of this yourself, perhaps unfairly, but with the optics of seen as a bit of an old dog for the hard road.
Maybe a little bit, yeah. I think probably the reason he hasn't featured is the depth that's been there, and probably more flair players. And it's probably a perception really from the public and maybe coaches that that electric spark is not there to make line breaks and break defenders down and run 40, 50 yards up the field and have an ability to do that. But he is an old dog for the hard road, if you like, and as you say, I just think his work rate is through the roof, and the amount of moments he has in a game is very impressive, and they're all pretty positive. He's not your flair player, as you say, as I was saying there in the back row, but someone who I think the amount of tackles he puts in, his ability to break down. Defensively, he's very, very strong and physical. And for one reason or another, he hasn't really had a prolonged period in the Irish side.
And why is that, Quinny, do you think?
Well, I think he made his debut very, very young, and he's been seen as a player who can fill a gap for you, if you like, and someone who won't let the side down. But I think because of probably the competition that's there, and probably more flair in the other back row players, footballing ability, all that kind of stuff. But I think it's unfair in the sense that, I would have possibly started him last week, and because of his form, and I think he just plays at a high level continuously. Caelan Doris is a loss because he brings that footballing skill and ability that's at a different level, that you kind of probably look at your back rows and you want someone who's a really outstanding footballer, offloader, and his form was outstanding in the last year or so, Caelan Doris. But I'd be very surprised if I don't think Ruddock ever plays a bad game for Leinster or Ireland. So it's no big deal. I think he's there on merit, and he was pushing to be close to selection anyway. So I think he's someone who can have a big performance and a big bearing on the match on Sunday.
Yeah, from reading the reports, it seems like Johnny Sexton will return to play, and James Ryan conversely won't. So the second row will be made up of Henderson and Byrne. Will you talk to us about that, the impact of that, and maybe the impact of it on the line out as well?
Yeah, James Ryan was a huge loss last week, and in fairness to Ian Henderson, he hadn't played in a while, but he came off the bench and played very well. He's a wonderful player, Ian Henderson. My only criticism at times has been just for him to be more of a presence, more of have more of a kind of a narky attitude and just be a bit of an enforcer as well. He's a really good footballer, good stepper when he carries, finds a little bit of space, and he was on the British and Irish lines in 2017, and I think he's formed for Ireland, and even on that line score was, I think back to the performance he had against the Hurricanes in Wellington, in the midweek team. He was outstanding. So he has that ability, and he's played very, very well for Ireland over the years. But you just love to see him have more of a presence and be more vocal, and maybe it's not in his nature to be barking orders and shouting and roaring in the field, but there's a real onus on him on Sunday now to run the line out, to be dominant, to be physically imposing against Willems and Bernard Leroux, who are very physical players for France. They're big physical guys. So James Ryan is a loss, but I think to have someone like Ian Henderson to come in, and I think last Sunday will have done him the world of good. Ty Bourne was outstanding in Cardiff, but physically they're coming up against two big, powerful guys who have been playing very well for France. So it's a big challenge, that one, and that tight five battle is probably key to Ireland. Getting a performance, getting a result on Sunday. So it's James Ryan is a loss because of his quality, and the work rate is through the roof, and what he does in the field for Ireland. But to have someone like Henderson to come in is a big boost. Who'll come on in the bench? Will it be Ryan Baird or Ultan Dillane? I'm not really sure, but we're a little bit thin on the ground there. I'd probably put Ultan Dillane at this stage because of the he's been there, done that, and he has that experience. I think Ryan Baird, it's a big ask for him. He's a wonderful player, wonderful footballer, but probably not the most physically imposing. And I think Dillane has been there, and he has incredible physicality for a second row, and huge work rate. So I don't know. I'd have no issue with Ryan Baird being there, but I would lean towards Ultan Dillane. Again, someone probably was a point to prove. He's been on the periphery of the Ireland setup for a number of years, in and out a little bit. So it's a challenging one for him, missing James Ryan, and who knows whether Sexton or not will start. The team will be announced at lunchtime today. There's obviously, everyone has an opinion and debate whether he should or shouldn't start. Obviously, if he's past fit, is it still right for him to play? It's probably outside our remit to call that, but I'm sure he'll call it in the right way, and the Irish management will. But you would imagine the average turnaround for concussions in the modern game, and this came from World Rugby and a conference call I was on last week, is probably 3 weeks for a player if they have concussion, that they're out for 2 to 3 weeks. And that's what the average is. That's not set in stone that you have to be out for that number of weeks. You obviously have to go through your protocols and be asymptomatic before you start that 6-stage process. So I think the concern is, neither player will have fully trained. I think, look, as you said, James Ryan it looks like he's not going to be involved. But if Johnny Sexton was past fit, how much involvement would he have had in the training during the week? And maybe you're better off to go with the guys who trained all week and put the preparation and the time and the minutes in.
There's been some comparisons this week between what the French doctors said about Johnny Sexton and what Eddie Jones said about Johnny Sexton a couple of years ago, the comments about his parents. Is that a fair comparison, or do you have to really put this on a different level because these are trained professionals and they've got a little bit of expertise, to say the least, in the general subject, maybe not on Sexton specifically?
Yeah, well, it was completely unethical, wasn't it? And he was right in saying that, and it just brings more attention to the whole situation. Of course, we've got to talk about concussion and have these discussions, given the issues that former players have, and the dementia symptoms that they have, and that's been very high profile recently with that coming out in the press. So it is a concern that, but I think concussion has been managed totally differently than it was in the past when I played. There's a lot more emphasis. There's independent doctors at every game, at all these internationals, 24 camera angles the independent doctor has. He can call a player off the field at any stage. And so I think a lot has changed. And But for the Eddie Jones thing really irked me and annoyed me in a couple of years back, because it is the impact. It's not really the player themselves that would be too concerned about what other people say, but it's probably what frustrates Johnny Sexton is his mom and dad and brothers and sisters and his wife and kids and stuff hearing this and it just being kind of discussed openly, which is wrong. You wouldn't have that if you go to your own doctor. I believe, of course, it's in the public eye and people all want to know what's happening and how it's been managed. But I think World Rugby have done the best they can the last couple of years to try and reduce the number of concussions and the risk that's there for players. But to have coaches coming out talking about it and a doctor like that, I think the doctor was totally wrong. And it doesn't. I think that I automatically think straight away this is a ploy from the French. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody in the French camp was talking to that doctor and asked him to put this out during the week and have it as a major distraction or talking point. But he knows himself, the Irish medics, and I'd be pretty strong on this, that there's no doctor in Ireland or no doctor involved with the Irish rugby camp would be coaxing Johnny Sexton, or the coaches be coaxing him to go out and play if he didn't pass those protocols. It's not something you want to see, a player getting concussed on Sunday and playing the following Sunday. But it depends what the symptoms were, and I suppose the past does come into it. Head knocks he's had before, but he hasn't had a concussion in a long time. So it'll be judged on its own merits, and they'll make that decision. I just think maybe if it was me and I was trying to think about this last night, would it be better off if he didn't play? Is it a case of less distraction, just put Ross Byrne or Billy Burns out there, start the game? Maybe that would be better. I don't know. If Johnny Sexton is fit, healthy and well, he would be very important to Ireland on Sunday. But I think what the French doctor did was totally wrong, immoral and disturbing, to say the least.
Quinny, when we look on the rugby side in relation to Sexton, there was so much chat. It seems like he'll play now, but there was so much chat during the week that if he wasn't to play, that Billy Burns would get to start. I have to say I was a bit surprised that it was such a sure thing. Whatever about Andy Farrell kind of ballsing it out with the player who made an error and maybe he wants to back him, it's not as if there aren't several other options at the same type of level, arguably at a slightly better level. Are you surprised that it appears he's going to be the backup again this weekend, or that the chat was about him starting again?
I'm not surprised, because I think of me as the player and being involved in a group, and if I was the coach, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. If this works, if Billy Burns was to start and you're looking for a reaction out of the player. I know fly half is a real confidence position, and if you do well and things go well in the game, you can have a superb performance out of the player. If something goes wrong early in the game, if he starts, it can have the opposite effect. But it doesn't surprise me, and I think Andy Farrell is that type of guy who would back his players, and there's probably, some people would say you need to be more ruthless, but we don't. They didn't call in another fly half, Adrian. So if Johnny Sexton doesn't play, it's Billy Burns or Ross Byrne. If Billy Burns is sitting on the bench last week as number 2, well then he probably should be number 1 this week. If that's the case, if you take out the couple of mistakes that he had, and you want to back the player, so it doesn't surprise me that Andy Farrell would back the player, because and you could get a great reaction out of him if he plays. He's a very good footballer. It's going to be a big task if he does start, because France are so good. But you could have a superb performance out of someone like Billy Burns if he plays. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. That kind of a scenario. What does it say? Does it cast him to one side? And if Ross Burns starts and he went down after a couple of minutes and Billy Burns has to come on, like, how would he be affected then, Billy Burns, from not starting? Is it a case of drop the head and then have to play 70 minutes and that can be playing in his mind? So I don't know. It's like having a crystal ball looking into it. But if he's number 2 last week, he should be number 1 this week, if according to the pecking order.
How many more chances does a player like that get then, Alan? Is it sort of like last chance saloon pretty soon, unfortunately, if that's how he started coming off the bench last week?
Yeah, well, look, if It probably is, and that's where probably Andy Farrell would need to be ruthless. And I don't know. I can't tell you what he's thinking. You want to try and back players, and I went through a period in my career where it was harder to get into the team than get out of the team at times because Ireland were on a very kind of a really, really good run, and if they lost the game to one of the top nations or the Six Nations in a Test match during the summer November game, invariably they would bounce back and win the next game. And Eddie O'Sullivan at the time would have given the players an opportunity to bounce back. By and large, the vast majority would have got that opportunity to bounce back. Given what they've done in previous games, Billy Burns doesn't have a big CV in him to look back and say, well, he's been there, done this for Ireland multiple times. He's got to kind of answer the critics and show people what he can do and show that he can be at this level, and he's good enough to be at this level. We still don't know, because international rugby is so much different than playing European or Pro 14. It's a massive step up, and I was really interesting to hear James Lowe this week talking about the difference, the way you get punished, one little mistake and it's a try. You can do so many good things in a game, and then you switch off. The pace, the tempo, and the quality of the opposition is so much different. So it is a little bit of last chance saloon, because public perception, whether it's right or wrong, kind of adds to the fact that if Billy Burns was to play and not have a good game and Ireland were to lose, well, then you've got to find some change, and he probably will go for change and call in some of the young players, given that we're kind of halfway between in the World Cup cycle.
Yeah, well, look at it. It's obviously a France team full of confidence, and Ireland, after a fairly error-strewn opening weekend last weekend, no Ryan, no Mahoney, is Sexton fully fit, no crowd, France adds on, so Ireland to win, Quinny?
Yeah, well, I think, look, I'm kind of glass half full after last Sunday. I think it still wasn't a perfect. Even with 14 men, we're all talking about the sending off and how critical that was. Of course it was. James Ryan, for me, was a huge loss out there as well. And it's just those mistakes and errors that they made in the second half. They can't afford to do that on Sunday. There was lots of positives, but mentally they've got to fight through this one and really pick themselves up on Sunday and just claw the result if they can. You can call these games, Adrian, and you can have egg in your face very, very easily as a pundit and be too optimistic. I was a bit pessimistic last week going in because I just knew the reaction from Wales. I just think it's there for Ireland. If they cut out the mistakes and errors, I think they can find a performance and get a result against a side that are full of confidence. If they allowed France to get their tails up, it could be a difficult day, and Ireland will be beaten. But I'm leaning towards an Irish win. Maybe I'm crazy, but leaning towards that win.
Your fellow pundit Owen there knows all about calling games incorrectly. So listen, if you if you need a shoulder to cry on at some point,
he didn't talk up the French or talk down the French team this week, did he? Himself and Gerard said they were absolutely crap and useless, and it didn't make media Olympic or any stuff like that. So, like I said on Monday, Adrian, it was all their fault that we lost against Wales.
I'm with you 100%. Come on, enjoy the games over the weekend.
Cheers, lads. Thanks
a million. Alan Quinlan is always there on a Friday morning. It's 8 o'clock, and we've a brilliant show lined up for you still to come. Plenty more rugby chat.